The sound of splintering wood woke Hannah Rutherford from her restless sleep on the schoolhouse floor. And for one terrible moment, she thought her late husband's creditors had somehow tracked her all the way to this abandoned building in Alamosa, Colorado territory. She sat up quickly, her heart hammering against her ribs as she clutched the thin blanket she had brought with her from Kansas. The November morning was cold enough that her breath formed small clouds in the dusty air. Through the broken window, she could see the first gray light of dawn creeping across the distant peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. The sound came again, not from the door as she had feared, but from somewhere outside, near the back of the building. Hannah rose quietly, smoothing down her worn calico dress with trembling hands. She was 23 years old and had been a widow for exactly 4 months. Thomas had died of cholera in Lawrence, Kansas, leaving her with nothing but debts and the clothes on her back. The creditors had taken everything else, even the furniture that had belonged to her mother. She had fled west with what little money she had sewn into the hem of her petticoat, hoping to find work as a schoolteacher in one of the growing towns of Colorado territory. But Alamosa had proven to be a harder place than she had imagined. The town was small, barely more than a collection of rough buildings clustered around the junction where the Denver and Rio Grande Railway was planning to lay tracks. The schoolhouse had been built with optimism 2 years earlier, but the teacher had left after only one winter, unable to tolerate the harsh climate and isolation. Now the building stood empty, its door hanging crooked on rusted hinges, its windows broken by storms or mischievous children. Hannah had been sleeping here for 3 nights, ever since she had arrived in town with her small carpet bag and discovered that there was no money to pay a teacher, no boarding house that would take her without payment in advance, and no charity to spare for a stranger. She had spent her last coins on bread and cheese, and now she had nothing left but hope and determination. The splintering sound came again, followed by a man's voice cursing softly. Hannah moved to the window and peered out carefully. In the weak morning light, she could see a tall figure working near the back of the building, hammering something into place. He wore a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat, and even from a distance she could tell he was a working man, his movements efficient and purposeful. Her first instinct was to hide, to wait until he left before showing herself. But then she noticed what he was doing. He was repairing the broken boards at the back of the schoolhouse, replacing the rotted wood with fresh planks. As she watched, he moved to the door and began working on the hinges, his breath steaming in the cold air. Hannah debated with herself for a long moment. She knew she looked terrible, her dark hair tangled and her dress wrinkled from sleeping in it. But she also knew she could not hide forever. Eventually, someone would discover her here, and it was better to face this stranger now in daylight than to be caught by surprise later. She gathered her blanket and carpetbag and walked to the front door. When she pulled it open, the man turned quickly, his hand moving instinctively to his hip before he checked the motion. He had the weathered face of someone who spent his days outdoors, with deep lines around his eyes and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' growth of beard. He looked to be about 30 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with gray eyes that studied her with undisguised surprise. "I did not mean to startle you," Hannah said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I should explain what I am doing here." The man removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair that needed cutting. "No need to explain, madam. I know who you are. The whole town knows. You are the widow who came looking for the teaching position." Hannah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I see. Then you also know that there is no position and no money to pay for one." "Yes, madam, I know that too." He hesitated, then said, "My name is Harrison Wallace. I own a ranch about 5 miles north of here, up in the valley." I came into town for supplies yesterday and heard you were in a difficult situation. That is one way to describe it, Hannah said quietly. She lifted her chin, determined not to show how desperate she felt. I was planning to move on soon. I just needed a few days to rest and decide where to go next. Harrison looked at her steadily, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her brave words to the fear and exhaustion underneath. "Have you eaten breakfast, Mrs. Rutherford?" The question caught her off guard. "No, but I am fine." "The hotel serves a decent meal," Harrison said. "Would you allow me to buy you breakfast? I promise I mean no disrespect." "It is just that I have a proposition I would like to discuss with you, and it would be better done over food and hot coffee." Hannah knew she should refuse. She did not know this man, and accepting favors from strange men was dangerous, especially for a woman alone. But the mention of food made her stomach clench with hunger, and the word proposition gave her a spark of hope. Perhaps he knew of a teaching position in another town or work of some kind. "That is very kind of you, Mr. Wallace," she said finally. "I accept." The walk to the hotel took only a few minutes, but it felt much longer to Hannah. She was acutely aware of her shabby appearance and the curious stares of the few people who were already up and about. Harrison walked beside her in silence, his long strides shortened to match her pace. When they reached the hotel, he held the door open for her and led her to a table near the back of the dining room. The waitress, a plump woman with a friendly face, brought coffee without being asked. Harrison ordered eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy for both of them, and Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes. She had not realized how hungry she was until the smell of cooking food reached her. "Thank you," she said softly. "You are very generous." Harrison shook his head. "It is nothing. I remember what it is like to be hungry." He paused, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I came to Colorado Territory 7 years ago with my father and brother. We filed a homestead claim on a piece of land in the valley and started raising cattle. It was hard work, and there were times we had nothing to eat but beans and cornmeal, but we made it through." Hannah heard the past tense in his words. "Your father and brother, they died 2 years ago," Harrison said quietly, "caught in a blizzard while checking on the herd. I found them the next day, frozen to death about a mile from the house." "I am so sorry," Hannah said, her own grief rising up to meet his. "I know something of loss. My husband died 4 months ago." "I heard. Cholera, they said," she nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The food arrived, and for several minutes they ate in silence. Hannah tried to maintain her manners, but she was so hungry that she had to force herself to eat slowly. The eggs were perfectly cooked, the bacon crisp, the biscuits light and flaky. It was the best meal she had eaten in months. When she finally pushed her plate away, feeling more human than she had in days, Harrison leaned back in his chair and studied her thoughtfully. "Mrs. Rutherford, I am going to be blunt with you, because I think you are a woman who appreciates honesty. I need help on my ranch and you need a place to live and work. I am proposing that you come work for me." Hannah felt her heart skip a beat. "What kind of work?" "Keeping house mainly," Harrison said. "Cooking, cleaning, mending, maybe helping with the chickens and the garden. The place has gone to ruin since my father died. My mother passed when I was young, and neither my father nor brother nor I had much skill with domestic matters. I have been living like a bachelor for too long, and it is affecting everything. I cannot find things when I need them. My clothes are falling apart, and I am tired of eating my own terrible cooking." "You want a housekeeper," Hannah said slowly. "Yes, and I am willing to pay fair wages plus room and board. You would have your own bedroom in the house, separate from mine. I would expect you to respect my privacy, and I would respect yours. This would be a business arrangement, nothing more." Hannah wanted to accept immediately, but caution held her back. "Mr. Wallace, I appreciate the offer, but I must ask, why me? There must be women in town who would be happy to have such a position." Harrison smiled slightly. "You would think so, but no. The few respectable women in Alamosa are already married or employed, and I will be honest with you, there has been talk about me in town. Some people think it is strange that I have stayed unmarried at my age, that I keep to myself so much. Some think I am too harsh, too difficult to work for. The truth is simpler. I am a man who values his solitude and has high standards for his work. I do not suffer fools gladly, and I do not care much for small talk or social occasions." "And you think I would be different?" Hannah asked. "I think you are a woman who needs a place to live and honest work," Harrison said. "I think you are educated and capable, based on the fact that you came here seeking a teaching position. And I think you understand what it is to lose everything and have to start over. That makes us equals in a way. We both need something from each other, and we both have something to offer." Hannah considered his words carefully. Everything he said made sense, and yet she could not shake the feeling that this was somehow too good to be true. "Mr. Wallace, I must be frank with you as well. I have no references to give you. My husband and I were only married for 2 years, and I spent most of that time caring for him. Before that, I lived with my father in Missouri and helped him run a small bookshop. I can cook and clean and sew, but I have never worked as a housekeeper before. Can you read and write?" "Yes, of course." "Can you manage accounts and keep records?" "Yes, I did that for my father's shop." Harrison nodded, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "Then you are more qualified than you think. Mrs. Rutherford, I am not looking for perfection. I am looking for someone who is willing to work hard and who will treat my home with respect. In return, I promise you will have a safe place to live, regular meals, and wages that will allow you to save money for whatever future you choose. If after a few weeks you find the arrangement is not to your liking, you are free to leave with no hard feelings." Hannah felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear and tension that had been there since Thomas died. This was not the life she had imagined for herself when she left Kansas. She had dreamed of teaching children, of making a difference in a growing community, of building something meaningful. But dreams had to bend to reality, and the reality was that she had no other options. "I accept your offer, Mr. Wallace," she said firmly. "When would you like me to start?" "Today, if you are willing. I have a wagon outside. We can collect your things from the schoolhouse and head back to the ranch. It is about an hour's ride." Hannah thought of her few possessions, her carpet bag and blanket, and felt a wave of embarrassment. "I do not have much to collect." "That is all right. We can make a trip into town in a few days to get whatever you need. For now, let us just get you settled." They finished their coffee and Harrison paid the bill, waving away Hannah's awkward thanks. Outside, the morning sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the dusty street. Harrison's wagon was a sturdy farm wagon pulled by 2 well-kept horses, and Hannah felt a small measure of relief. Whatever else Harrison Wallace might be, he clearly took good care of his animals and equipment. The ride to the schoolhouse was brief. Hannah retrieved her belongings while Harrison waited in the wagon, his eyes scanning the street as if watching for something. When she returned, he took her carpet bag and helped her up onto the wagon seat with a hand that was surprisingly gentle for someone with such calloused palms. The road north out of Alamosa was rough but passable, cutting through sagebrush flats before climbing gradually into a broad valley. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains rose to the east, their peaks already dusted with snow, while the San Juan Mountains loomed to the west. The air was crisp and clean, and after the dusty confines of the schoolhouse, Hannah found herself breathing deeply, feeling her spirits lift despite her uncertainties. Harrison drove with easy competence, his attention on the horses and the road. After a while, he began to talk, his voice low and steady over the creak of the wagon and the sound of hooves on packed earth. "The ranch is called the Broken W," he said. "My father named it that because of the way the creek bends through the property, making a broken W shape. We have about 600 acres of grazing land and a good water source. Right now, I am running about 200 head of cattle and a dozen horses. It is not a large operation, but it is profitable enough to keep going." "That sounds like a lot of work for one man," Hannah observed. "It is. I hire help during roundup and calving season, and I have a hand named Miguel who comes twice a week to help with the heavy work. But mostly I manage on my own. It keeps me busy." "What about the winters? Are they very harsh?" Harrison nodded. "The worst you can imagine. The snow gets deep, and the temperature can drop to 40 below. We can be cut off from town for weeks at a time. That is why I need someone at the ranch who can help keep things running smoothly. If something happens to me during a storm, there needs to be someone there who knows how to manage." The thought of being snowed in for weeks with a man she barely knew should have frightened Hannah, but instead she felt strangely calm. Harrison spoke of practical matters in a practical way, and there was something reassuring about that. He was not trying to charm her or impress her. He was simply laying out the facts and trusting her to make her own decisions. They crested a rise, and the valley opened before them, a broad sweep of grassland dotted with cattle. In the distance, Hannah could see a cluster of buildings nestled against the slope of a hill, protected from the north wind by a stand of cottonwood trees. As they drew closer, she could make out a two-story house built of logs and rough-cut lumber, a large barn, several smaller outbuildings, and a corral with split-rail fencing. "It is not much to look at," Harrison said, a note of apology in his voice, "but it is solid and weatherproof." Hannah thought it was beautiful. After days of sleeping on a bare floor in an abandoned building, the sight of that sturdy house made her want to cry. "It looks wonderful," she said honestly. Harrison glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face. "Wait until you see the inside before you make that judgment." He had not been exaggerating about the state of the house. When Harrison unlocked the front door and led Hannah inside, she had to bite back a gasp. The main room was large and well-proportioned, with a stone fireplace at one end and windows that would let in plenty of light if they were not so dirty. But every surface was covered with dust, the floor was tracked with mud, and there were piles of clothing, tools, and papers scattered everywhere. Dishes were stacked in a dry sink, cobwebs hung from the ceiling beams, and the whole place smelled of wood smoke, old coffee, and neglect. "I warned you," Harrison said quietly. Hannah set down her carpetbag and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "How long has it been like this?" "Getting worse gradually over 2 years, I suppose. I keep things clean enough to prevent disease, but I do not have time for much else. And honestly, I have not cared. After my father and brother died, this place stopped feeling like a home. It became just a place to sleep between work." There was such loneliness in his words that Hannah felt her throat tighten. She understood that feeling, the sense that a place was just a shell without the people who had made it matter. "Well," she said briskly, pushing aside her emotions, "I suppose I should start earning my wages. Can you show me where things are? I will need water, soap, brooms, anything you have for cleaning." Harrison blinked as if he had not expected her to get started so quickly. "You want to begin today? You must be tired from the journey." "I am fine. The sooner I start, the sooner this place will be livable." She paused, then added, "For both of us. Something shifted in Harrison's expression, a softening around his eyes that made him look younger and less guarded. "All right, let me show you around." He took her through the house, pointing out the kitchen with its cast iron stove and pump for well water, the pantry that was nearly bare of supplies, the sitting room with its comfortable but dusty furniture. Upstairs there were 3 bedrooms, one clearly Harrison's, one that had belonged to his father and brother, and one small room at the end of the hall that was relatively clean and filled with afternoon light. "This was going to be my mother's sewing room," Harrison said, standing in the doorway of the small room. "She died before we finished the house, but my father always kept this room clean for her memory. You can have it if you like, or you can take the larger room that my father used." Hannah looked around the small room with its simple bed, dresser, and rocking chair. The quilt on the bed was faded but clean, and there were pale squares on the walls where pictures had once hung. "This room is perfect," she said softly. "Thank you." Harrison nodded and stepped back. "I will bring up your bag and then get out of your way. There is food in the pantry, basic supplies. Help yourself to whatever you need. I will be out working until supper time. If you can manage something simple for the evening meal, I would appreciate it, but do not strain yourself." "There is plenty of time to get settled." "I will manage," Hannah assured him. "What time do you usually eat?" "Whenever I remember to stop working. But if you want to set a schedule, I will follow it. 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock sounds fine." After Harrison left, carrying her small bag upstairs and then disappearing out to the barn, Hannah stood in the middle of the main room and tried to organize her thoughts. The task ahead of her was daunting, but she had learned during her marriage that the best way to tackle an overwhelming situation was to break it down into small, manageable steps. First, she found a broom and swept the floors, creating clouds of dust that made her cough. Then she hauled water from the pump and heated it on the stove, using it to wash the dishes and scrub down the kitchen. She found soap and rags and tackled the windows, letting in the bright afternoon light. She organized the scattered papers into neat stacks, hung up the clothes that were lying around, and shook out the rugs. By the time the light began to fade, Hannah was exhausted but satisfied. The house was far from perfect, but it looked and smelled significantly better. She had found enough supplies in the pantry to make a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and coffee, and she had the table set and food ready when Harrison came in at 6 o'clock exactly. He stopped in the doorway and stared. "I cannot believe this is the same room." Hannah felt a flush of pride. "It still needs work, but it is a start. It is more than a start, it is a miracle." Harrison washed up at the pump and sat down at the table, still looking around as if he could not quite believe what he was seeing. "Mrs. Rutherford, I think hiring you might be the smartest decision I have made in a long time." They ate in comfortable silence, both too tired and hungry for much conversation. Harrison praised the food sincerely, even though Hannah knew it was nothing special. When the meal was finished, he helped her carry the dishes to the sink and then excused himself, saying he had animals to check on before full dark. Hannah washed the dishes and then climbed the stairs to her small room. Her whole body ached, but it was the good ache of productive work. She unpacked her few belongings, placing them carefully in the dresser, and then sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel the full weight of the day. This morning, she had woken up on a hard floor with no prospects and no future. Tonight she was sitting in a clean room in a solid house, with honest work to do and wages to earn. It was not the life she had planned, but it was so much more than she had dared hope for only hours ago. She thought of Harrison Wallace, his quiet competence and unexpected kindness. He was not a talkative man, but there was something steady and reliable about him, something that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her father died. She knew she would have to be careful not to mistake gratitude for anything deeper. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. But as she lay down on the comfortable bed and pulled the faded quilt up to her chin, Hannah could not help feeling that she had somehow stumbled into a place where she might, eventually, belong. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost natural. Hannah woke early and started the fire in the kitchen stove, made coffee and breakfast for herself and Harrison, and then began the day's work. There was so much to do that she never ran out of tasks. She cleaned every room in the house, organized the pantry, mended Harrison's clothes, washed curtains and linens, and slowly transformed the neglected house into a proper home. Harrison was as good as his word about respecting her privacy and maintaining proper boundaries. He was polite and considerate, always knocking before entering a room, never presuming on her time or attention. He worked from dawn to dusk most days, coming in only for meals and sleep. But Hannah noticed small things that suggested he was a more complicated man than he first appeared. He read books in the evening, working his way through a small collection of volumes that included Shakespeare, Milton, and various agricultural journals. He played a harmonica sometimes when he thought she could not hear, simple melodies that sounded sad and sweet. And he was unfailingly gentle with his animals, talking to his horses and dogs in a low voice that revealed a capacity for affection he kept carefully hidden from people. Miguel, the ranch hand Harrison had mentioned, turned out to be a weathered Mexican man in his 50s with a quick smile and a wealth of knowledge about ranching. He spoke little English, and Hannah spoke no Spanish, but they managed to communicate through gestures and goodwill. Miguel clearly approved of her presence, grinning broadly whenever he came into the kitchen and found hot food waiting. "Señor Harrison, he is better now," Miguel told her in halting English one day. "Before, he is too sad. Now he smiles sometimes." Hannah had not noticed Harrison smiling, but she supposed even small changes were significant in a man who kept his emotions so carefully controlled. One morning about 3 weeks after her arrival, Hannah came downstairs to find Harrison sitting at the kitchen table with a pencil and paper, doing accounts. He looked up when she entered, and she noticed dark circles under his eyes. "You are up early," she said, moving to start the coffee. "Could not sleep. I have been going over the numbers, trying to figure out how to make ends meet this winter." He rubbed his eyes tiredly. "I am short on feed and the price of cattle is down. I may have to sell more of the herd than I wanted to." Hannah poured water into the coffee pot and set it on the stove. "May I look at your accounts? I used to help my father with his business ledgers." Harrison hesitated, then pushed the papers toward her. "I would appreciate another set of eyes." Hannah sat down and studied the columns of numbers. Harrison's handwriting was neat and his math was accurate, but his bookkeeping system was disorganized and inefficient. "Do you have records from previous years?" "In the desk in the sitting room." Hannah spent the morning going through Harrison's accounts, organizing them into a clearer system, and comparing expenses and income from year to year. By noon, she had identified several areas where money was being wasted, not through extravagance but through poor planning and lack of attention to detail. "You are paying too much for feed because you are buying it in small quantities throughout the year," she told Harrison over lunch. "If you bought in bulk during harvest season, you could save nearly 30%. And you are not getting fair prices for your cattle because you are selling to the first buyer who comes along. If you held out for better offers or drove the herd to Denver yourself, you could increase your profit significantly." Harrison stared at her. "How did you figure all that out?" "It is simple mathematics and business sense. My father taught me to look for patterns and inefficiencies." She felt a little self-conscious under his gaze. "I am sorry if I overstepped. You did not ask for business advice." "No, I am grateful. I am good with cattle and land management, but I have never had a head for the financial side of things. My father handled that, and after he died, I just tried to keep doing what he had done." Harrison leaned back in his chair, looking at her with new respect. "Mrs. Rutherford, you are full of surprises." "Hannah," she said impulsively. "You can call me Hannah if you like, Mrs. Rutherford sounds so formal, and we are living in the same house." Harrison smiled, a real smile that lit up his whole face and made him look years younger. "All right, Hannah, and you should call me Harrison. Mr. Wallace was my father." The use of first names changed something between them, a subtle shift that made their interactions feel more personal and less like a business arrangement. Harrison began seeking out Hannah's opinion on ranch matters, discussing his plans with her over supper, and asking her to review his contracts and correspondence. Hannah found herself looking forward to these conversations, drawn in by Harrison's intelligence and the passion he showed when talking about his land and animals. She also began to notice other things about him. The way his hair curled slightly at his collar when it needed cutting. The deep timbre of his laugh, rare but wonderful when she managed to coax it out of him. The strength in his hands when he lifted heavy objects or worked with the horses. The kindness in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. Hannah told herself sternly that these observations meant nothing. Harrison was her employer, nothing more. She was grateful for his kindness and respected his abilities, but she had no business thinking of him as anything other than the man who had given her a job when she desperately needed one. But her heart, traitorous thing that it was, did not seem to care about the boundaries she was trying to maintain. Winter arrived in early December with a vengeance, bringing heavy snows and temperatures that plunged below zero. True to Harrison's warning, they found themselves cut off from town for days at a time. But the house was well stocked with food and fuel, and Hannah found that she did not mind the isolation as much as she had feared. There was something peaceful about the snow-covered valley, something that made the house feel like a sanctuary from the harsh world outside. She and Harrison fell into an even closer routine, working together to keep the house warm and comfortable, to care for the animals that could not fend for themselves, to make the long winter days pass with some semblance of normalcy. One evening in late December, a blizzard struck with such force that Harrison barely made it back from the barn. He stumbled through the door covered in snow, his face red and raw from the wind. Hannah rushed to help him out of his frozen coat and settled him near the fire with hot coffee and blankets. "I have never seen it come on so fast," Harrison said through chattering teeth. "I was checking on the cattle in the near pasture, and suddenly I could not see 5 feet in front of me. I only made it back by following the fence line." Hannah felt her heart clench with fear at how close he had come to danger. "You should not go out again tonight. The animals will have to fend for themselves." "I know. I just hate leaving them out there." Harrison stared into the fire, his jaw tight with frustration and worry. "They have survived storms before," Hannah said gently, "and you will be no use to them if you freeze to death." Harrison glanced at her, and something in his expression made Hannah's breath catch. "You were worried about me." "Of course I was worried. You are my employer and my friend." The word felt inadequate, but she could not say what she really meant, that the thought of him lost in the snow had terrified her in a way that went far beyond friendship or gratitude. "Hannah." Harrison said her name quietly, and there was something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "These past 2 months have been the happiest I have had since my father and brother died." Not just because the house is clean and the food is good, though that is part of it. It is because of you, because of your company and your intelligence and the way you have made this place feel like a home again. I look forward to coming in from work because I know you will be here. I find excuses to linger over supper because I enjoy our conversations, and lately I have been thinking about you far too much for someone who is supposed to be just your employer. Hannah could not breathe. Harrison, I know this is not what we agreed to. I know I promised this would be just a business arrangement, and I will honor that promise if that is what you want, but I had to tell you the truth. I have feelings for you, Hannah, deep feelings, and I hope, that maybe you feel something for me too. She should have been shocked. She should have been frightened or offended or at least cautious. But instead, Hannah felt a surge of joy so powerful it left her dizzy. I do, she whispered. I did not want to admit it, even to myself, but I do have feelings for you. I have for weeks now. Harrison set down his coffee cup and reached for her hand. His fingers were still cold from the storm, but his touch sent warmth flooding through her entire body. Hannah, I am not a man who does things by halves. If we pursue this, if we let our feelings grow, I want you to know that I am thinking of forever. Of marriage and a life together, of building something lasting. I will not toy with your affections or waste your time. I would not expect you to, Hannah said. That is not the kind of man you are. Then let me court you properly. Let me prove to you that I can make you happy, that I can be the husband you deserve. We have all winter to get to know each other better, to be sure of our feelings. And when spring comes, if you are willing, I would like to marry you. Hannah felt tears sting her eyes. After so much loss and fear and uncertainty, here was this good, solid man offering her not just security but love. Yes, she said. Yes to all of it. Harrison smiled and lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. You have made me the happiest man in Colorado territory. The blizzard raged outside for 3 days, but inside the house, Harrison and Hannah existed in their own warm world. Their courtship was necessarily limited by circumstances, but Harrison found ways to show his affection. He brought her wildflowers he had pressed in a book the previous summer. He played his harmonica for her in the evenings, teaching her the melodies so she could sing along. He talked to her about his dreams for the ranch, for their future, and listened intently when she shared her own hopes and fears. They kissed for the first time on Christmas Eve, standing in front of the fireplace with snow falling softly outside the window. It was a gentle, tentative kiss that quickly deepened into something more passionate, more desperate, as if they were both starving for affection and connection. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers and said, I love you, Hannah. I know it is too soon to say it, but I do. I love you too, Hannah whispered. I think I have since the day you bought me breakfast and offered me hope when I had none left. They agreed to wait until spring for the wedding, wanting to do things properly and give themselves time to be absolutely certain of their decision. But as the winter progressed and they grew closer every day, that certainty only strengthened. Hannah had never felt so understood, so valued, so cherished. Harrison was everything she had not known she needed. Steady and strong, but also tender and thoughtful, a man who showed his love through actions as much as words. In February, during a brief break in the weather, Harrison drove Hannah into town to buy fabric for a wedding dress and to speak with the circuit preacher about performing the ceremony. The townspeople were surprised but pleased by the news, and several women offered to help Hannah with the preparations. It was clear that Harrison was well respected in the community, and people were happy to see him finally settling down with a wife. You have done wonders for him, the hotel owner's wife told Hannah as they looked at fabric together. He was wasting away after his family died, working himself to death and never letting anyone close. You brought him back to life. Hannah felt a warm glow of pride and happiness. She was building a life here, putting down roots in this harsh but beautiful land. She was going to marry a man she loved deeply, a man who loved her in return. After all the pain and loss of the past year, she was finally finding her way to something good and lasting. Spring arrived in late March with a sudden rush of warmth that melted the snow and filled the valley with the sound of running water. Harrison worked long hours preparing for calving season and getting the ranch ready for the busy months ahead. But he always made time for Hannah in the evenings, sitting with her and making plans for their wedding and their future. They decided to marry in April, on a clear Saturday afternoon with wildflowers blooming across the valley. Hannah wore a dress of simple white cotton that she had sewn herself, with lace trim that one of the town women had given her as a gift. Harrison wore his best suit, his hair freshly cut and his face cleanly shaved, and when he saw Hannah walking toward him in the small church, his eyes filled with tears. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Hannah felt her voice shake as she repeated her vows, promising to love and honor Harrison for the rest of her life. When Harrison slipped the gold ring onto her finger, a ring that had belonged to his mother, she felt the weight of it not as a burden but as a promise, a symbol of the life they were going to build together. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said with a smile, and Harrison did, pulling Hannah into his arms and kissing her with a passion that made the small congregation chuckle and applaud. They held a simple reception at the ranch, with food and music and dancing. Miguel played his guitar while several of the town women sang, and Harrison surprised everyone by being an excellent dancer, whirling Hannah around the yard until she was breathless and laughing. As the sun set over the mountains, casting golden light across the valley, Hannah leaned against her new husband and thought that she had never been so happy in her entire life. That night, in the bedroom they would now share, Harrison made love to his wife with a tenderness and care that brought tears to Hannah's eyes. He was gentle and patient, taking his time to learn what pleased her, murmuring words of love and devotion against her skin. Hannah had never experienced anything like the intimacy they shared, the sense of two people truly becoming one. When they finally lay tangled together in the darkness, both sated and content, she felt as if every hardship she had endured had been leading her to this moment, to this man, to this life. "I never thought I would be this happy again," she whispered into the darkness. "After Thomas died, I thought my chance at love and family was over." Harrison held her closer. "We have both been given a second chance. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking it." Hannah turned in his arms and kissed him softly. "I could never regret this." "You saved me, Harrison. In every way that matters, you saved me." "You saved me too," Harrison said. "You brought light back into my life when I thought I would live in darkness forever." The weeks after the wedding were busy and happy. Hannah threw herself into being a rancher's wife, learning about cattle and horses and the rhythms of ranch life. She discovered that she enjoyed the work, the sense of partnership with Harrison as they managed the property together. She had a good eye for evaluating livestock, and Harrison came to trust her judgment on which animals to keep and which to sell. In May, they made the drive to Denver to sell their cattle, and Hannah got her first glimpse of a real city. She marveled at the tall buildings and bustling streets, but she found herself eager to return to the quiet of the valley. The ranch was home now, in a way that nowhere else had ever been. That summer was one of the happiest of Hannah's life. She and Harrison worked hard during the day and made love at night, falling into bed exhausted but satisfied. They talked about expanding the herd, about maybe building a bigger house someday, about the children they hoped to have. Hannah had worried that she might be barren, since she had never conceived during her first marriage, but Harrison assured her that they had plenty of time, and there was no need to worry. In August, Hannah realized that her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be sure, then another before finally telling Harrison. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, and then set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "Are you happy?" Hannah asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy, I am ecstatic. A baby, our baby." "Hannah, you have given me everything I ever wanted." They were cautious about sharing the news, waiting until Hannah was several months along and clearly showing before telling anyone else. When they finally announced it to Miguel and the few ranch hands they had hired for the season, there was much celebration and many toasts to the future heir of the Broken W. The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Hannah tired more quickly than usual and had to give up some of her heavier chores. Harrison was fiercely protective, insisting that she rest and let him take over most of the household work. Hannah found his hovering both annoying and endearing, and she had to constantly remind him that she was pregnant, not fragile. In early March, as the snow was beginning to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, Hannah went into labor. Harrison rode to town through the mud and slush to fetch the midwife, and then paced the downstairs while Hannah labored upstairs with the midwife and the wife of the hotel owner helping her. It was a long, difficult labor that lasted through the night and into the next afternoon. Harrison wore a path in the floor with his pacing, and when he finally heard the thin wail of a newborn baby, he took the stairs 3 at a time. "You have a son," the midwife said with a tired smile. "A big, healthy boy." Harrison entered the bedroom and found Hannah propped up against the pillows, exhausted but glowing, with a small bundle in her arms. She looked up at him with such love and pride that he felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Meet your son," Hannah said softly. Harrison sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the red-faced infant with his tiny fists and dark hair. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Hannah, I cannot believe we made this together." "What should we name him?" Hannah asked. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Harrison knew exactly what he wanted. "Henry, after your father." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "You remembered. Oh, Harrison, that is perfect." Little Henry Wallace proved to be a healthy, vocal baby who demanded constant attention. Hannah was exhausted but deliriously happy, and Harrison was completely besotted with his son. He would come in from working and immediately wash up so he could hold the baby, talking to him in a low voice about the ranch and the cattle and all the things they would do together when Henry was older. "You are going to spoil him," Hannah warned, but she was smiling as she watched her husband cradle their son. "A boy should be spoiled by his father," Harrison replied. "Within reason, of course. I will still make sure he learns the value of hard work and responsibility." As Henry grew, the ranch thrived. Harrison and Hannah made a formidable team, combining his practical knowledge with her business acumen to turn the Broken W into one of the most successful ranches in the valley. They expanded their herd, improved their grazing land, and even hired several permanent hands to help with the increased workload. When Henry was 2 years old, Hannah found herself pregnant again. This time, it was an easier pregnancy and a quicker labor, and in November they welcomed a daughter they named Hope. With her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes, Hope was a sweet-tempered baby who seemed content to observe the world around her with calm interest. "Now we have everything," Harrison said one evening, holding Hope while Henry played at their feet. "A son and a daughter, a successful ranch and each other. I could not ask for more." "I could," Hannah said with a mischievous smile. "I could ask for a bigger kitchen. With all the cooking I do for the ranch hands, I am running out of space." Harrison laughed. "Then we will build you a bigger kitchen. Anything you want, my love." They did build the addition to the house the following spring, expanding the kitchen and adding a proper dining room large enough to accommodate all the ranch hands. They also added a schoolroom, because Hannah was determined that their children would receive a proper education, even if it meant teaching them herself. As the years passed, the Wallace family became a cornerstone of the growing community. Hannah organized a proper school in Alamosa, raising money and recruiting a teacher from back east. Harrison served on the town council and helped establish better roads and services for the area. Together, they hosted gatherings at the ranch, barbecues and dances that brought the scattered ranching families together and helped build a sense of community in the isolated valley. Henry grew into a sturdy, serious boy who followed his father everywhere and showed a natural aptitude for ranching. Hope was clever and curious, always reading and asking questions, much like her mother. When Henry was 7 and Hope was 5, Hannah gave birth to twins, a boy and girl they named James and Helen. The house was chaotic and noisy and filled with love. On quiet evenings, when the children were finally asleep and the ranch was settled for the night, Harrison and Hannah would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. Hannah would lean against her husband's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, and marvel at how far they had both come from that cold November morning when she had been sleeping on the floor of an abandoned schoolhouse. "You ever regret it?" Harrison asked her one such evening. "Giving up your dream of being a teacher to become a rancher's wife?" Hannah thought about it seriously. "I did teach, in a way. I teach our children and I helped establish the school in town. But no, I do not regret my choice. I found something better than I had dreamed of. I found a true partner, a man who sees me as an equal and values everything I bring to our life together. I found love and family and a place where I belong. How could I regret that?" Harrison pulled her closer and kissed the top of her head. "I was so lonely before you came. I did not even realize how much until you were here, filling up all the empty spaces. You made me whole again, Hannah." "We made each other whole," Hannah corrected. "That is what love does." Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythm of ranch life. Henry grew into a capable young man who took over more and more of the ranch management, allowing Harrison to slow down a bit as he aged. Hope married a lawyer from Denver and moved to the city, though she visited often with her own growing family. The twins, James and Helen, proved to be inseparable, and they both decided to stay on the ranch and help run it as a family business. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Harrison surprised Hannah by taking her back to Alamosa, to the old schoolhouse where he had first found her. It had been renovated and was now a thriving school with a full-time teacher and 30 students. "I wanted you to see this," Harrison said as they stood outside the building. "To see that your dream did come true, just not in the way you expected. You helped make this school happen. All those years of fundraising and organizing and pushing the town council, they paid off. Those children in there are getting an education because of you." Hannah felt tears well up in her eyes. "I had forgotten about that. I have been so busy with our own children and the ranch that I lost track of this." "You never lost track of what matters," Harrison said. "You just expanded your definition of what teaching means. You have taught our children, supported the school, and shown everyone in this valley what a strong, intelligent woman can accomplish. You have taught me more than I can ever repay about love and partnership, and what it means to truly share a life with someone." Hannah turned to her husband, this man who had given her everything when she had nothing. His hair was graying now, and there were deep lines around his eyes, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever known. "I love you, Harrison Wallace. I have loved you for 20 years, and I will love you for 20 more and however many come after that." "Forever," Harrison said, pulling her into his arms. "We have forever." And they did. They grew old together on the ranch, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, watching the valley change and grow while their love remained constant. Hannah never forgot that desperate morning when she had woken up on the cold floor of the schoolhouse, with no hope and no future. But she also never dwelled on it, because every moment since had been filled with blessings she could never have imagined. Harrison had given her his ranch, yes, making it legally half hers in a gesture that had shocked the lawyers but felt entirely natural to them. But more importantly, he had given her his heart, his trust, his unwavering support and devotion. He had seen her not as a charity case or a convenient housekeeper, but as a partner worthy of everything he had to offer. In return, Hannah had given him back his life, his hope, his ability to feel joy and love again. She had turned his house into a home, his solitary existence into a family, his simple ranch into a legacy that would endure for generations. On a warm summer evening many years later, when Harrison was 72 and Hannah was 65, they sat on the porch of their home and watched their great-grandchildren playing in the yard. Henry's eldest son was running the ranch now, with help from James and several of Henry's other children. Hope visited twice a year with her lawyer husband and their brood of scholarly children. Helen had married Miguel's grandson and lived in a house just down the valley, close enough to visit daily. We did well, did we not? Harrison said, his hand finding Hannah's automatically, the way it had thousands of times over the decades. "We did better than well," Hannah replied. "We built something beautiful and lasting. We loved each other and raised good children and contributed to our community." "What more could anyone ask for?" Harrison smiled and squeezed her hand. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing." As the sun set over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Hannah rested her head on Harrison's shoulder and felt perfectly content. The journey from that cold, desperate widow sleeping on a schoolhouse floor to this moment had been long and sometimes difficult, but every step had been worth it. She had found her place in the world, her purpose, her true love. She had found home, not in a building or a town, but in the heart of a good man who had seen her worth when she could barely see it herself. And together, they had created something that would outlast them both. A family built on love, a ranch built on hard work and partnership, and a legacy of devotion that their children and grandchildren would carry forward into the future. When the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, Harrison and Hannah went inside together, still holding hands, still perfectly in tune after all these years. The house was quiet now, the children gone home, but it was the comfortable quiet of a life well lived, a love well tended. Hannah lay in bed that night, tucked against Harrison's side as she had been for so many years, and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." "For what?" Harrison murmured sleepily. "For saving me, for loving me, for making your ranch ours and your life mine, for everything." Harrison kissed her forehead tenderly. "You saved yourself, my love. You just let me help. And making my life yours was the easiest thing I ever did, because from the moment I saw you standing in that schoolhouse door, brave and determined despite everything you had lost, I knew you were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours." "Forever," Hannah whispered. "Forever," Harrison agreed. And it was. Their love endured through all the remaining years of their lives, a testament to the truth that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the hardest circumstances, and that true love, once found, can transform everything. the widow who had been sleeping in an empty schoolhouse, and the rancher who had made his ranch, hers, had created a life together that neither could have imagined alone. And in doing so, they had proved that hope and love could flourish even in the harshest wilderness.